It is the anniversary of 9/11, and this latest appearance he did on Piers Morgan, he said that there is, without a doubt, knowledge that, or there's information or evidence that the Israelis knew about 9/11 in advance.
It may very well come as a big surprise, especially for the younger audience. But even touching on this topic for the better part of the past 24 years simply hasn't been possible. Today, I would like us to have a look at two things, both from the lovely Kim Iversen show. Firstly, let's have a look at a short clip in which Tucker is being interviewed by Piers Morgan. Now, whether you dislike Tucker Carlson or not, or you think Piers is somewhat clueless, or totally clueless, that's besides the point here. I'm going to ask you to focus on Piers Morgan's expressions during this interview. Pay close attention to his reactions and demeanor. Then we talk about it. See you in a second.
No, of course I didn't allege that, the Jews did it. I don't even know what that means. I think, in fact, saying things like that is a way to discredit real questions.
Right.
Like, we know, Benjamin Netanyahu on camera right after said this is a good thing because it brings the United States into a conflict that we've been involved in on an existential level for decades. He said that out loud. I'm not guessing, you can pull the tape. We know that a group of Israeli art students, who clearly were not art students, clearly some of them were aligned with Israeli intelligence, were arrested and held for quite some time in the United States before being released without charges. And we know that a group of them, again, I'm quoting an FBI document here, not the internet, filmed the attacks on 9/11, and I'm quoting, seemed to have foreknowledge of those attacks. Now, you were not allowed to follow up in any of this. Fox News did a series with Brit Hume and Carl Cameron, which many people have seen in a bootleg version on the internet, but they did it like within weeks, saying, what is this? There was an Israeli spy ring in the United States, and they clearly knew 9/11 was coming. This is Fox News. They pulled that under pressure. They pulled that off the internet. It's not searchable in any Fox News archive, but they aired it. I know the people who did it. Of course, I worked with them for years. They're real people. They're not crazy. In fact, they're pro-Israel, but they had a fact set before them, and they reported it.
Did you notice Piers Morgan's expressions in this short interview? He was very, very uncomfortable. Almost nervous, I'd say. And that's interesting. Regardless of any topic discussed, Piers is always keen on showing that he knows better than the guest being interviewed. He is always very confident, except for when he discusses anything related to Israel. It has been this way since he pushed a bit on the Israeli spokesperson, who showed little interest in the number of civilians killed since October 7th. It is as if he is required to walk a fine line, not letting anyone push a certain anti-Israel narrative too far. I would go so far as to say he looks afraid. If you didn't catch it, have a look again. Now, let's watch Kim taking us through some of the September 11th oddities, because there is something interesting we can add to it.
Yeah, of course. I think what he's referring to are the dancing Israelis that were seen on top of a building in New York. This was on the morning of 9/11. There were several men. I don't know if this photograph is, it's hard to know exactly if this photograph is of them, if this was like security footage, or if this is a rendering of them, because I actually don't think there is any real footage of them. I think this is a rendering to represent it.
This is a weird one, I know. You'd be forgiven if you thought they looked like a Backstreet Boys rehearsal gone wrong. But multiple witnesses did indeed report this group filming the entire incident. So despite this odd photo, stick with us for a bit longer.
But this is what circulates around. So on the morning of 9/11, there were several men who were reportedly seen on a rooftop in New Jersey. So New Jersey, on the other side of the river, they're looking at the Twin Towers. They were filming the burning World Trade Towers, and according to witnesses, they were dancing, they were cheering, they were taking photographs. The men were later stopped by New Jersey police. They were arrested. They were taken in. They were Israeli nationals who allegedly were working for a moving company called Urban Moving Systems at the time. Now, the big question is, what were a bunch of moving, so supposedly they were students, they were working for a moving company, but they ended up being Israeli nationals. What were these, whether you're a student, whether you're working for a moving company, what are you doing on the roof of a building in New Jersey, looking straight at the World Trade Center, at the towers, watching them come down? What are you doing there filming?
So Kim has talked a lot about it being extremely convenient that these students just happened to be at the right time and place to film the tragedy. However, there is one very important point we need to remember. This is 2001. There are no smartphones around, and video cameras are hard to come by, as compared to today. The most common video recorder at the time was perhaps the Sony Cybershot, launched in 1996. So, in 2001, people were not walking around taking photos and filming everything and nothing just like today. Back in the day, it was special events, birthdays, weddings, and similar events. In other words, for these guys to have been there at that very spot, filming and then cheering, which is everything you would not expect, it is incredibly suspicious.
What are you doing there? And then cheering, dancing, and celebrating the fact that the country had been attacked. There were 5 of them that were detained by the FBI. They were questioned for weeks and held for weeks. Eventually, they were released. They were deported back to Israel for immigration violations, is what they ended up saying. So they didn't charge them with anything. They released them, and they basically told the rest of us to shut up about it. It's a conspiracy theory, supposedly, even though they were arrested and detained and held for weeks. U.S. intelligence investigated whether they had prior knowledge to the attacks, and according to the official, the official reports, there was no conclusive evidence that has ever been made public that they were involved in 9/11 planning. However, just use your brain for 2 seconds, right? I mean, what were these moving students doing on top of a building, watching the Twin Towers burn and then eventually fall down? What were they doing filming it? How did they know to set up filming equipment? How would you know to do that? Oh, we just happened to be there, right? There's a lot of these coincidences that happen. We just happened to be there. We just happen to have filming equipment. We just happen to be pointing them directly at the Twin Towers. We just happened to see this amazing event that we loved so much we danced and celebrated. I mean, it just so happened that we as moving students happen to be there filming. I mean, what's the big deal? And we happen to be Israeli. And this happens to benefit us more than anybody. So it just so happens that, by the way, also everybody in that age group just so happens in Israel to be in the IDF, working in the military, or maybe even recruit. Maybe they were Mossad. Who knows how old they actually were. The FBI released redacted files years later showing that the investigation was real. This was considered a conspiracy theory for a really long time. They would shove this off as, anybody would bring it up and say, what happened to those Israelis that you guys arrested? And that was considered conspiratorial. How dare you bring it up? You're an idiot. You're a lunatic. And then, of course, like usual, years later, what do? Years later, they actually released it turns out we did actually arrest these dancing Israelis. We questioned them and we deported them. It's just another one of those conspiracy theories that ends up being true. Local New Jersey news outlet, the Bergen Record, reported the story shortly after the attack, so people knew about it. And in 2001 to 2002, some coverage surfaced in mainstream media, but then the story largely faded from U.S. reporting. And that's what Tucker Carlson was talking about, how some mainstream outlets were like, hey, what about this? And then it got buried and shoved to the side, and you weren't allowed to bring it up, and you can't find it anywhere on their sites, even though they did publish it. They had to remove it and remove every single last trace of it, which is not suspicious at all, is it?
Yeah, so I've always thought it's very important not to get carried away with conspiracy theories. What I mean by that is, I think that it's important to have ideas and concepts firmly grounded in the truth. But that's the problem right there, isn't it? Kim just took us through it. That's a lot of coincidences to swallow right there. And don't forget another sinister part. The people responsible for making sure that all these events and facts don't get the attention of the public, I'd say that's very scary, almost frightening. It makes you wonder just what on earth is really going on in our lives. To what extent are we being lied to?
In Israel, a TV interview later aired with 2 of the men who admitted they were there to document the event. So they said this in Israel proudly, declaring it to Israeli news. Obviously, if they were there to document the event, they knew about it. They knew it was going to happen. So, it's just, I think on this day we have to remember that a lot of you watching, if you're young enough, don't remember 9/11. You just weren't old enough to. I mean, if you're in your 20s or even in your 30s, you probably don't remember this event. For those of us that were adults at the time, this was a horrifying event that really And little did we know at the time that it would mark the beginning of really kind of the end of the United States, which is going to war for Israel, endless, numerous wars in the Middle East, sacrificing our own youth, sacrificing our own liberties, our freedoms, sacrificing what really is what America should have been all about, which is freedom and liberty, and instead living in fear, demonizing the entire Muslim and Middle Eastern population.
If we follow Kim's reasoning to the very end, and quite frankly, I can't see why we shouldn't, it takes us to a very dark place, a place with very little hope for the future, I would say. So, I guess a pertinent question could be, is there anything positive at all regarding all of this? The only thing I can think of is that, at least for now, we can discuss what happened, at least a little bit, without the men in black showing up. It's not much, but I guess it's better than nothing. I thought Kim's last comments in the video were very much what many of us feel, so it's only fitting she gets the last word in this commentary video also. Take care, and see you soon again.
I was 21 years old when 9/11 happened. I was in college. I remember waking up. I was living in Sacramento at the time, or in that area, going to UC Davis. And I remember waking up at the time and turning on the TV and just seeing this plume of seeing this and not knowing what happened, what was going on. I woke up right before the second tower fell. And it was terrifying. It was horrifying. I think all of us that were adults at the time remember exactly where we were on 9/11 and the impact that it had on all of us and the fear that it instilled in all of us. And it is, now in hindsight, we're able to look back. I think also because the younger generation didn't have that same traumatic, they don't have the traumatic memory. So a lot of the younger people are looking back at 9/11 and thinking, hey, what's this? You guys have marched us into war my entire life. People in their 20s, this is their entire lives. We've been at war because of 9/11, essentially. It started then, and which it didn't. It started before 9/11. And there's a lot more other, there's a lot of other evidence that points to them having knowledge or even in being involved. And I think those kinds of questions are more prevalent these days, because people are starting to notice, but what they're noticing is that Israel as a country is out for itself and that they have been doing whatever is best for them, and we have been sacrificial lambs in that process. And 9/11, just an absolute tragic, terrible day, tragic, terrible event that happened. But even more tragic is what happened to the country after 9/11.